Crooked River, Chapter 9. May 1812. When Mercy was being a pesky little bother one morning, I took out some of the beads and such for her to see. We kept all of the things from Indian John hidden in the chest at the foot of our bed. They were tucked underneath the embroidered pillowcases that Laura had stitched for her married life, when she found someone for marrying, that is. Carefully I put everything we had been given on the bed. They made a peculiar, colorful line. Mercy crawled onto the bed to watch, and Laura perched on the edge of our wooden chest. She had just returned from the Hollies, who had finally recovered their senses after 2 weeks of the fever. "Look at this little quill, Mercy." I waggled one of the red-dyed ones in front of her. The quill reminded me of a long stem of meadow grass, with tiny white ridges where it appeared to have been bent and folded. "Let me see," Mercy demanded, reaching for it with her small fingers. "Don't you ruin it," I said loudly, and Laura glared at me. I picked up another quill and held it in my hand, studying it. "What do you suppose the Indians used them for?" I asked Laura. My sister leaned closer. "Weaving, maybe?" "Ain't porcupine quills round?" I rubbed the quill between my fingers. "All of these are flat." Laura shrugged. "Perhaps the Indians made them that way. Or," I said, dangling the quill in front of Mercy's sour face, "maybe this here quill came from a flat red porcupine. You ever seen one of those in the woods before, Mercy? Huh? Walking around like this on his flat red feet?" I pretended to stomp across the floor, while Mercy giggled and laughed. And right at that moment, as I was stomping across the floor, and we had beads and trinkets scattered all over our bedclothes, someone howled at the outside our cabin door. "Get the door, Rev," Laura hissed, scooping the beads and quills into her hand. "Quick, while I put these away." I cast my eyes around the room to see what else was out of place. The table was a mess of bowls and dishes. The slop jar still sat by the door waiting to be emptied. Where to set it? The only place I could see fit to hide it was in the corner next to our food cupboard. I tore off my apron and threw it over the jar for good measure. Then I made a dash for the door before the visitor decided to set foot inside. "Yes, sir, begging your pardon," I said, opening the door halfway. Outside stood a fellow who had all the appearances of a trapper. Unshaven face that hadn't seen a wash bin in weeks. Clothes that were nothing but shreds and patches. A sour smell coming off of him like clabbered milk. The fellow grinned at me, and I saw that 4 of his teeth were missing in the front, as if he had lost them in an ear of corn. "A 6pence to see the savage you got," he said, and held up a worn old coin. "What?" came flying out of my mouth before I could stop it. "I says, miss," the fellow repeated slowly, "a 6pence for showing me the savage you got inside your house." He waggled the coin in front of my eyes and grinned without his teeth. Indian John. A peculiar feeling came over me. I don't know why, but the sight of that trapper standing there with a 6pence sent a streak of anger right through me. I didn't want to let some ugly old trapper in our house, so he could take a gazing stock out of Indian John. Wouldn't want people paying to stare at me, that's what I thought. No, matter of fact, you can't see the Indian, sir, I said, trying to keep my voice polite and proper. "He ain't taking visitors today." "What?" Now it was the trapper's turn to look surprised. He narrowed his eyes and took a step closer to me, as if I was nothing but a little mosquito he was planning to swat out of the way. "Ain't Major Carver your pa?" he said sharply. I nodded. "Then you run and get him, girl. Stop vexing me." But at that moment Laura appeared behind me. "Our pa and the boys ain't here," she said, pulling herself up to her full height. Even the trapper seemed startled, looking her up and down again. "Perhaps, if you don't mind, you could come back later." Laura wiped her hands on her apron as if he had caught us in the middle of baking or cleaning. "You Mis' Carver, his wife?" the trapper said, turning his head to the side and spitting a stream of brown tobacco, half of which dribbled down his chin. He didn't seem in any real hurry to leave. "Daughter," Laura answered. "I'm the oldest Carver daughter. Our ma's dead. May her soul rest in peace." I knew that by saying this to the trapper, Laura meant to give him the idea that in the absence of Ma, she was the one taking charge. "I ain't here to cause you two gals no trouble," the trapper said, making his voice sweet as tree sap. "Just want to get a glimpse at that captive Indian." "We're in the middle of our baking," Laura said. "Ain't gonna stay for more than 1/2 minute." Me and Laura didn't have any choice, seemed like, but to let him in. We couldn't stand in the way of a grown man. Not if Pa got word of it. So the trapper scraped his boots on the stone beside the door and pushed his way right inside. I could see his eyes darting from one thing to the next, taking account of everything we had. The pewter on the table, our big food cupboard, the red painted chest from the east that sat at the foot of Pa's bed. "Indians upstairs," Laura said, trying to hurry him on his way. It wasn't long after the trapper went up the narrow steps that I knew something was wrong. There was a thumping noise as if a large stone had been dropped on the floor, and then came the sound of the trapper's raspy old laughter. A sickly feeling crawled right into my stomach. I couldn't hear all the words the trapper was saying to Indian John, but the few I could catch were ugly enough. There was more raspy laughter and scraping and thumping on the floor above our heads, as if the trapper was tormenting poor Indian John, who was desperate to move. What happened next took me by surprise, though. Laura ran to the hearth, picked up the big frying pan, and flew up the steps to the loft. "Out of our house!" she hollered at the trapper in a voice that didn't even sound like her own. It was loud and booming, as if she was shouting into a barrel. "Out of our house before I smash you to bits!" And believe me, by the sound of her voice there was no question that she would smash the trapper's head flat as a rattlesnake's, if given half the chance. I expect that the trapper must have believed this too, because he left the loft so fast he missed half of the steps coming down. While he was shooting past me and out the door, I noticed that he had something in his hand. It looked like maybe it was a twist of brown paper, but I didn't pay it any real notice. I just stood by the hearth with my knuckles squeezed white, praying for the cabin door to close and for us to be rid of him. After the trapper had gone, Laura came back down the stairs. She didn't even glance in my direction. All she said was, "May the Lord forgive me for defending the life of a murderer," and she dropped the pan on the hearth with a loud clang that made me jump. "And may the Lord keep Pa from finding out what I'd done too," she added. Then she picked up a lump of bread dough we had left on the table and began to knead it furiously, as if she was trying to squeeze the life out of it. "Any harm come to him?" I said finally. "To whom?" Laura answered. "Indian John." Laura's hand stopped right in the middle of her work. "Don't you show even the smallest kindness or pity for that Indian, Rebecca Carver," she said fiercely, "or I will take all of the things you've hidden and I'll burn them to ashes this very minute." Laura lifted up the dough and thudded it back on the table. Lifted and thudded, hard enough to send up clouds of flour. To my way of thinking, she wasn't making the smallest bit of sense. First she saved Indian John from the no-good trapper, then she scolded me for asking a trifling question. "I only wanted to know," I kept on. With the way Laura's eyes looked daggers at me, I didn't dare to open my mouth again. I didn't dare to ask if she saw the trapper carrying something when he left the loft, or if she thought that he had stolen something from us or from Indian John. I just kept silent and did my work without a word. By evening, I had nearly forgotten all about the trapper. I didn't know then what an unfortunate mistake that would later turn out to be. The trapper steals from me as the crow steals from a patch of corn. I can smell a trapper coming upwind in a rainstorm 2 camps away. The trapper laughs and plucks a feather from my head, laughs and struts as if he's 10 feet tall in his boots, too tall to fit in his own canoe. Holding the feather in his hand, he turns and runs. "Cowardly, Gichimukuman," I whisper. "You could steal the wings from the soaring eagle, but it would not make you strong or brave."